Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to you all about The Ruin, which is an Old English poem. First, some background about Old English poetry. There are only about 30,000 lines of Old English verse that has survived since the Anglo-Saxon period. Most of the verses and the poems are housed in several codices, one of which is the Exeter Book, which is located in the Exeter Cathedral Library, which is pictured above. It's known as their hidden library, and that is in the UK. The Exeter Book contains the poems The Seafarer, The Ruin, and also The Wanderer and other Old English elegies. It also contains a variety of Old English riddles. So there are some complications with the translation of The Ruin, particularly because the original text has been destroyed by severe burn damages. So we are missing quite a few big chunks of the text. If you read the little paragraph on the handout that was posted to Canvas with the poem of The Ruin, it explains that it was damaged, and so they're missing some chunks of the text. This has impacted the translations. Because of the damage, some of the words are really hard to identify, and so scholars have sort of done their best guess. There's been a lot of speculation, and the interpretations and the translations are all very varied because of the damages and the amount of guesswork that's gone into it. However, regardless, there's still been so much scholarly work done on the Exeter Book and particularly the Ruin, even though it's missing so much. But still, lots of scholarly work, a lot of people working to put the pieces together. So The Ruin is an Old English elegy, and if you watched Catherine's video, she talked about this when she talked about the Seafarer, so I won't go into too much detail. She covered it really well. But with the Old English elegies, there tends to be a focus on loss, the loss of something, whether it be a loved one, a dear object, a place, one's home, one's life. There's also the theme of separation, the brevity of life, and earthly elements, the passing of time, etc. Basically, it's just, they're very melancholy and very sorrowful. Some of them have some hopeful elements to it, but there is definitely that gloomy atmosphere and tone throughout the elegies. And some examples of the elegies are The Ruin, and then as Catherine had discussed, The Seafarer, and then The Wanderer. The Ruin, according to some scholars, separates itself from the other elegies because the loss that is represented is not the personal loss of the speaker. It's not the speaker lamenting their own personal pain and misery or longing. It's, it's about a city, and the speaker is sort of omniscient. There are also the themes of fate and time, which are very common in all of the elegies, and you can see them across all three of the ones that I have listed there. For the elegies, fate is a force beyond our control. This is common in most Old English poetry. Fate controls everything. We cannot control fate. It can't be reckoned with. It can be very unforgiving. And then also time. And time can be a relief in Old English poetry, as in, the passing of time over difficult circumstance or painful events is a relief because it's going away, but it can also be a sorrow as someone who might be stuck in that time of pain and misery, or the fading of one's life, the passing of time leading to death can be a time of sorrow and tragedy. And so we see these themes play out in Old English poetry, but especially in the elegies. So the story of The Ruin describes a fallen Roman city, and the exact Roman city That's an issue of debate between scholars. Some argue that it's not meant to be a real place, it's figurative, it's metaphorical, and others who look at it more literally think that it represents the very real city of Bath. Some have argued Chester, Durham, or Hadrian's Wall was another one. It's not specified whether it's meant to be a real city or not, but it is something that is hotly debated. But the speaker of the poem goes into great detail describing how magnificent and beautiful the city was before fate destroyed it and brought it crumbling and decaying to the ground. So it begins with this description of the city in ruins. It's ruined. The buildings are crumbling. There's moss covering the buildings. There are red stains. It's all very dark, depressing, gloomy, and tragic. And then he shifts in between what the city is as it is ruined, and then goes back and thinks about what it used to be, and the magnificence of it all, and how well everyone was doing in the city before it all fell apart. So some of the poetic elements, there's a dichotomy set up between the past and the present. The past city when it was thriving, and then what it is now, and sort of this, again, this dichotomy set up between the two, going back and forth between them. Fate and time are characterized. Some scholars have said that they're characters acting in the poem. I don't know if I would say fate and time are necessarily characters. I think fate might be, and we'll look at that here in a second. Time, not so much. But that was something that I had read in some of the scholarly work that has been done on this poem. Obviously, alliteration is a huge part of Old English poetry. It really adds that musicality. We've heard it in every poem, every text that we've read so far. And then there's a lot of imagery, which I'm not going to talk about on its own, but it's going to come up a lot when we're talking about that dichotomy in that first part. Just a lot of imagery that we'll see. So we're going to begin this poetic exploration by starting with that dichotomy. We're going to look at the present and then the past, and then the present and then the past, which is sort of how the poem is set up. So when we open up the poem, splendid this rampart is, though fate destroyed it. The city buildings fell apart, the works of giants crumble. Tumbled are the towers, ruined the roofs, and broken the barred gate. Frost in the plaster, all ceilings gape, torn and collapsed and eaten up by age. So if we just look at the imagery here, the city is destroyed, things have fallen apart, works of giants crumbling, which is both talking, I think, in my opinion, the works of giants crumble, talks about the grandeur of the city. It alludes to how magnificent and great and glorious it was, but now it's crumbling. The use of the word crumble there. The towers are tumbling. The roofs are ruined, and broken are the gates. Ceilings are wide open with the word gape there. Torn, collapsed, eaten up. There's this imagery of destruction, decay, and just in general falling apart and, well, being in ruins, as is the name of the poem. And so you have this imagery here, and that sets up the dichotomy, because then in the next stanza of the poem, we go into what the city used to be like. So we transfer back to the past, and we look at what the city was before it started to crumble. So here we have resolute masons, skilled in rounded building, wondrously linked the framework with iron bonds. The public halls were bright with lofty gables, bathhouses many, great cheerful noise, and many mead halls filled with human pleasures. So the use of the words wondrously, bright, great, cheerful human pleasures. Gives us this sense of just a happy, thriving city. And not just thriving, but words like iron and lofty. Lofty means um, thick and resilient. And iron, obviously, when you think of iron, you think of something strong and sturdy. So the city wasn't just bright, cheerful, happy, full of just thriving everything, but it was also strong and resilient. Um, and so when you compare that to then the crumbling city, it sort of sets up this contradiction, and you have to wonder, how did the city then crumble if it was in fact so strong and so thriving? And so if we go back to the present, which we do in the next few lines, the city crumbled, its repairers fell, its armies to the earth, and so these halls are empty, and this red curved roof now sheds its tiles. Decay has brought it to the ground, smashed it to piles of rubble. So again, we go right back to that image of everything falling apart, being destroyed. The city crumbled, the repairers fell, armies to the earth. So now it's talking about death, the death of the armies that were protecting the city. The people that were keeping the city alive have also died. They fell. And so these halls are empty. There's also recurrence of the word red. It comes up 2 or 3 times in the poem. And if you think about the symbolism of the color red, meaning blood, death, violence, anger, there are a lot of meanings, and it's not clearly a positive meaning here. It sort of hints at this war, this violence, that has caused this city to crumble. And then we're right back into words like decay, smashed, rubble, um, just everything becoming destroyed and decaying, falling apart. Nothing more than a pile of rubble. That is what this iron, lofty city has become. It's become rubble. So then we go back to the past again, where this is sort of where the poem ends. Now, again, there was a whole bunch of chunks of the poem missing from the middle, so we don't know what happened in the middle of this poem, but this is what's been translated, and this is what, the translation ends on. It's more of an uplifting note. So we have a host of heroes, glorious, gold adorned, gleaming in splendor, proud and flushed with wine, shone in their armor, gazed on gems and treasure, on silver, riches, wealth, and jewelry, on this bright city with its wide domains. So again, we have this sort of grandeur set up. We have heroes, they're glorious heroes, gold adorned, gleaming in splendor, which ties into that word bright. Everything is bright and shiny. They're flushed with wine. They're having a good time. Everyone's a little tipsy. Shown in their armor. There's this essence of light in this past image here, when you have that with the gleaming, the shone, the bright. But then you also have this imagery of wealth, gems and treasure, silver, riches, jewelry. All of these things, again, represent this thriving, well-to-do society. Everyone is happy and merry and having a good time, and everything is bright and cheerful and wonderful. And so that sets up that, again, you go back from the past to the present, what it was, what it is, how it got there. And that ties into our next part. We have fate and time as characters now. So the poem doesn't overtly state that it was necessarily war or famine that destroyed the city, but instead says that fate is what destroyed it. So we have in line 1, splendid this rampart is, and for those of you that don't know, a rampart is just a sturdy wall or a defensive barricade, and Fate destroyed it. Fate destroyed this strong iron city that was set up with that dichotomy. But not just fate, but time. When we look at line 6, we see that everything was eaten up by age. And age makes us, when you think about age, something aging, it's a passing of time. Time is going past and everything is falling apart with age. 100 generations now of people have passed by. Again, there's this passage of time that has aided in this destruction of the city. And then again, we come back to fate. So mighty fate brought change upon it all. So we see fate as an actual character and time as well. Well, more so fate than time in my interpretation of the poem. But fate is the one responsible for damaging the city. And we see fate as this actual figure, in a way, coming and just completely decimating the city, kicking things over, making everything crumble and fall apart. And it's this idea of action on the part of fate that gives us that sort of human character representation. And then, of course, we can't not talk about alliteration. I have just a few lines here. Obviously, the poem, being an Old English poem, is just jam-packed full of it. So in line 2, we have Bergstede, Burstan, Rosnaf. And then in line 5, Sjerde, Sherbeorg, Shorene. And then Mod, Monade, Mun, and then Meoro Heal, Monig, Mondreama. So again, we have the repeating the B, we have the sh sound, we have M multiple times, and that's just a little bit of the alliteration, and it adds that musical rhythmic effect to the poem. When you listen to the poem being read in its original Old English, it gives it that sort of musical quality that we hear, especially when Dr. Smith reads the translations of the poem, because he does it so well. So yes, alliteration is obviously very common, one of the few things you see in all Old English poetry. And to sort of cap up this video, I know I'm a little over time, I just wanted to point out an interesting metaphor that I came across as I was doing some research. So one of the scholars found that the word Wealstan in line 1 has also been translated as cornerstone rather than rampart, which has led to an interpretation of the ruin as a poem about Christ. Because in the Bible and in Christianity, Christ is often referred to as the cornerstone on which the church was built. Then we also have the word weird, which means fate, but as people began translating, they also found that it could be translated as God's thought. And then some people have even taken it so far as to say it means God himself. And so thinking about this idea of fate destroying this city, one of the metaphors being thought about is that the city is actually God, and because Christ being the body of the church, and the church being like the city that all people live. And then, of course, if weird is God himself, and if you know anything about the Gospels in the Bible, God sacrificed Christ for the church. And so there's this destruction of the body of Christ in the crucifixion. But there's also been told that it's more about St. Peter building the church. Other people say it's about the destruction of the church itself. It's very muddy, but it was very interesting, and I thought I would just bring it up and see if you all had any thoughts about it. Anywho, this is my bibliography. These are the sources I used. And I definitely recommend checking out the Anglo-Saxon Literature Handbook, which is that first one there. It had just a lot of really fascinating information. And then I also listed the Christological reading of the ruin. Again, very fascinating. I definitely recommend, if you have the time, checking it out. Thank you all for listening to my way too long video. I hope you all have a wonderful break and take care of yourself.